So good to be on this call with you all today. We are here with David Thompson, who's the president and CEO of Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services. Clearly, that's a mouthful for me. You probably will hear both David and I abbreviate it as PCHAS. And what Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services does is they serve children and families really throughout not only Texas, but in our region, in Louisiana and in Missouri as well. I was just seeing on your website, David, 5,000 families are touched by the work that PCHAS does, which is so incredible. We're so glad to have you here. As we get started, before I turn it over to David, I just want to remind you all of a couple of housekeeping pieces. So I encourage you, as you're on this Zoom call, to keep yourselves muted, not because we don't want to hear from you, but because it will help with the sound quality for all. One of the funny things about Zoom is it picks up these funny little sounds, which can create interference for the person who's speaking. So do keep yourselves on mute during the call today. That being said, I want you to be aware of the chat feature. If you're using a computer to access Zoom, you're probably going to see the chat feature. It's like a speech bubble down at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, you can see an ongoing conversation, which can include everyone in the room. And what we want to use that for today, and this may be common to some of your past experiences, is if you have a question that's coming up during the presentation, feel free to go on and drop it there. We're going to have time for Q&A at the end of our time. And so just trust, Mike and I are going to be watching that. I will see your questions. And so when we get to the Q&A portion, that's really where we'll feed it from. So be aware of the chat feature. It's the one with the speech bubble. With that said, why don't we open with prayer, and then I'll turn it over to David. Let's pray. Gracious and loving God, I thank you for this group of your children who you have gathered here to this place to learn, to get to know the ministry of Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services, to hear from David about his perspective on ministry to children and families. I pray that we would be edified in this time, that we would be built up by your Spirit in this time, and that our conversation would glorify you, O God. We do pray at this time for all children and families, especially in this time of pandemic where the threat of illness may just feel like one more thing, an unexpected burden none of us ever could have prepared for. And do pray that children and families especially would feel your comfort and your courage and your peace in this time. Continue to be with us. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David to give us an introduction and an update on the ministry of PCHAS. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate that. I'm always amazed at the way we're able to use technology now to continue together and to connect with one another. And I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with your Sunday school class and to have the opportunity to talk about PCHAS, Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services. You know, it's funny, Claire, you talked about Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services being a mouthful, and it is, but I have to tell you a quick story. It reminded me of how we wound up with the acronym PCHAS specifically. Many years ago, and Paul Gamble, I know Paul is on the chat today. Paul will probably remember this. When we merged two Presbyterian organizations many years ago, we adopted the name Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services. And I happened to be the one many years ago who was charged with registering the internet domain name for our website, meaning what was the domain name for our website going to be. And we first went and looked for pchs.org. And it was taken by the Parker County Humane Society. I don't know why I still remember that, but it was already taken. So we wound up with pchas.org, and that stuck. That's become our acronym ever since then, is PCHAS rather than PCHS. But it was all about the internet, is why we ended up with that acronym. So thank you for reminding me of that fun story, Claire. I appreciate that. I love having the opportunity for a Sunday school class or something like that, because it gives us a little bit more time to kind of dive into a little bit more detail about why PCHAS does what it does, why we are here, why this ministry exists, and beyond just what we do today. You know, why do we exist, and why do we do what we do? And so that's what I want to focus on today, quite frankly. And before I do that, though, let me just kind of introduce myself. Again, my name is David Thompson. I have lived in Austin for almost 30 years now, which kind of amazes me. It makes me realize that I'm not as young as I used to be when I first moved to Austin years ago. And I remember back in, I guess it was 1993 when we moved to Austin, I remember people were complaining about all the new people moving to Austin at the time and how much bigger it was getting, and we wanted to close the gates and not let anyone move into Austin anymore. And I feel like I've been here long enough now that I can say that. I can say, let's close the gates and not let anyone into Austin anymore, so that it doesn't keep growing. But it is a great place to be, and certainly feel strong connections to Westlake Hills, many connections over the years. And so before I forget to say, though, I have been with PCHAS a long time. I was hired to work at PCHAS by Chuck Mendenhall. Many of you may know Chuck and Laura Mendenhall over the years. Chuck was president of Presbyterian Children's Homes at the time, and he hired me back in 1999 to come to work for PCHAS. And I've been here ever since, so well over 20 years now, which another thing that amazes me, that I'm not as young as I used to be. And so I'm honored and privileged to be able to still be here after all of these years, and in particular to serve now as president. I've served as president of PCHAS now for about 2.5 years, and so it's my honor and privilege to be able to do that. But I also wanted to say thanks to Westlake Hills. There's been a lot of connections over the years to Westlake Hills Presbyterian. Many of you may know that the church, Westlake Hills, donated funds for the playroom in our office that I'm actually in right now. I came to my office so I'd have a better internet connection, and we have a playroom here for kids to use while their parents are in training or meeting with our staff. And Westlake Hills donated the funds for that playroom, and so that it gets used often. In fact, I love when I go downstairs and see kids using that playroom. And so so thank you all for being a part of that with us and for donating those funds. You all have also contributed as a church to our capital campaign that we have ongoing right now for an expansion of our programs in San Antonio. We've had a campus in San Antonio for about almost 30 years now, and we're expanding our programs on that campus, and you as a church are part of that by having contributed to that capital campaign. So we definitely appreciate you all doing that as well as just your ongoing annual support from the church, and many of you who have been longtime supporters of Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services. Lastly, I just want to say we moved. In fact, Paul Gamma was a big part of this. Paul helped us locate new offices, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago now. And we now are down kind of in more South Austin off of William Cannon. But for a long time, our office was off of BK Road, not far from Westlake Hills. And as we started to get squeezed in that office space, which is why we moved, we started more and more relying on Westlake Hills for meeting space and different kinds of events that we might host. So we've had many meetings over at you all's church. And so I just want to say thank you for doing that for us, especially in that time of need where we really didn't have the space to do that at our offices. So thank you. Let me kind of dig in now to the substance of what I want to talk about today, and that is why PCHAS does what it does and how we do it today. So I want to start with a little bit of history, and I'm going to try something here. I'm going to try my skills with using technology and try to share my screen here, see if it works. Let's see here. Claire, you might just kind of tell me, are you all seeing my slide now that says history on it?
Yes, we are.
All right, great. Well, I wanted to give you something to look at, better than looking at me the whole time. So I thought I would give you all something to look at for part of my presentation today, and also helps me keep on track. So where I want to start today is with our history. PCHAS has been around for a long time. In fact, we have 3 different origin stories, you might say. And that's because PCHAS as it exists today is the result of the merger of 3 different historic Presbyterian agencies. And I want to just tell you very quickly about those three origin stories, because I doubt that all of you at least have heard all of these origin stories. We tend to tell one or two, but we maybe not all three. And so I want to quickly tell you all three of them. The oldest one is the one you see kind of highlighted there on your screen. In 1903, the women of the First Presbyterian Church in Dallas created what became an orphanage when one of their church members, Leontine Blaney, came to them. She was dying of tuberculosis, and she came to them because she was concerned. She didn't have a plan for who would take care of her kids if she died. She knew she likely would die. And so the women of the First Presbyterian Church in Dallas, they stepped up and they opened an orphanage. And that orphanage began in a small home in Dallas, and then fairly quickly in 1905 moved to a rural campus outside of Itasca, Texas, which is, you see there, a school bus from days gone by there in Itasca. We still have a program on that campus in Itasca, Texas today that's been operating there since 1905. So 117 years going back in the history there to our earliest start in Dallas, when the women of the church helped a woman in need and helped her to have a plan for her kids. Second origin story I'll tell is from the state of Missouri. Many of you may know that a few years ago, the Presbyterian agency in Texas merged with the Presbyterian agency in Missouri. So I want to tell you just real quickly how that agency began. That agency began in a town in southeast Missouri called Farmington. It's not a small town, but it's a smaller town. And back in the day, back in the 19-teens, it was the heart of the lead belt. And there were tons of lead mining going on in that part of the country. And as you might imagine, that was a pretty dangerous occupation and a pretty dangerous activity that was happening there in that community. And unfortunately, there were many parents who died as a result of the lead mine that was occurring there in and around Farmington. So Presbyterians, the First Presbyterian Church in Farmington, and other Presbyterians in that area stepped up, and they started an orphanage for children who didn't have a home because of the accidents and deaths that occurred in the lead mining industry. And so they started that orphanage there in Farmington. And so that's the second part of our history. The third origin story is also back to Texas. There was a separate Presbyterian agency that began in Albany, Texas. Some of you may know where Albany is. It's a town out in West Texas. That truly is a small town out in West Texas near Abilene. And the interesting thing about that history is, some of you may know the history of the orphan trains back from the 1800s and very early 1900s. And basically what those were was the large and overcrowded cities on the East Coast would place orphans on trains and send them west to live. By today's view and standard, that may seem like something that we wouldn't want to do, but at that time, that was the plan for children who were orphaned in those overcrowded cities. And so they shipped them on trains, sent them on trains out west to communities all over the U.S. out west. And ironically, the last stop of one of those orphan trains was in Albany, Texas. And so Presbyterians at the First Presbyterian Church in Albany started an orphanage back in the 19-teens for children who came to that last stop of the orphan train there in Albany. So I want to ask you to do something. Claire kind of told you, I'm going to unshare my screen here so I can kind of see it as well. Claire told you how to use the chat, or encourage you to use the chat. I would appreciate it if you would kind of interact with me on this and maybe write in the chat, what is the thing what's something that all three of those origin stories have in common? And if you could just write that in the chat, I would appreciate it. I'm just looking for what's similar about how each of those agencies began that now makes up Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services. Someone maybe type a response in there to that, keep the conversation going. I'll pause just a minute and see if anybody might have something to add there. And don't worry about typing whole sentences. It could just be one word if you want. Someone just typed, no one took the children into their homes. Another, people responding to a need. Yeah. Civilians that stepped up, taking care of children. Very good. Presbyterian ancestors. There you go. Presbyterian ancestors responding to a need. Very good. Yeah, those are all that's the kind of response I would have expected. And particularly I love that tie to Presbyterian ancestors. These are our ancestors from 100 years ago, as has been said here, who stepped up in response to a need in their community to take care of children who needed help. And so that's what I want to start with is this is our heritage. This is our Presbyterian ancestors. I would add one thing that hasn't been mentioned here. Let me see if I can share my screen again. I always worry that I'm going to mess this up somehow when I do it. I'm going to try it anyway. The other thing I would add that I didn't see there, and Claire, if you could just let me know, are we back to my screen, I hope?
We are indeed.
All right, thank you, Claire. The one thing I would add that I didn't see any one place in there is that these Presbyterians, when they stepped up in the need, stepped up to meet a need, whether they realized it or not, they were responding to a biblical call. We've all heard this verse from James 1:27, that true religion is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And that's what those Presbyterians, our ancestors, were doing over 100 years ago, is they were responding to that biblical call. They were practicing true religion when they were looking after orphans in their distress. And I just want to connect with that today. PCHAZ's mission is basically a restatement of that phrase, to look after orphans in their distress. That is what PCHAZ has been doing for the last 100 years on behalf of the church. PCHAZ is a part of the church. We are a ministry of the church, and it is one of the ways that the church fulfills this biblical call to look after orphans in their distress. And that's why we do what we do, is we feel a strong call that is what we are doing whenever we are responding to that call. Now, what's interesting about that, though, is we don't necessarily respond to that call in the same way over the last 100 years. We've always been evolving. And that's true from the beginnings of time. You know, when we started over 100 years ago, we started as orphanages. All three of those stories that I told started orphanages to help children who didn't have families, because they truly didn't, whether it was because of lead mining, or whether it was because they were on the orphan train heading west, or whether it was because of tuberculosis that parents were dying. These were children who didn't have families, and Presbyterians responded to that need by starting orphanages. I want to give you an example of that. I don't know if you'll be able to see this real well on your screen. This is an application. It's the top part of a one-page application that you can see for admission into the program in Itasca. You can see there it's in Files Valley, Hill County, Texas. Well, that's Itasca. And as best we can tell, this application was for the 41st, that's why you see number 41 up in the top right-hand corner. This was for the 41st child that we believe was placed in Itasca. And what I want to call your attention to is the responses to each of those questions. You'll see under name of child, not known, and then date of birth, father's name, father's religious belief, all the way down, not known. When this child, the 41st child placed in Itasca, was placed, no one even knew her name. No one knew her circumstances. She didn't have a family that was caring for her. So the response to that was to give her a home. And I don't know how this happened, but you'll note that later in different prints, someone wrote on that first line that her real name was Alma Glover. You know, I don't know if somehow they were able to connect with someone who knew her name, or if they gave her a name. But one way or another, this child now had a name and was being helped there at the orphanage in Itasca, Texas. So that's how Presbyterians responded 100 years ago, giving children a name and giving them a home when they didn't have a family to provide one for them. So time has passed. There's been lots of evolving over the years. We've done foster care. We've moved from the dormitory style orphanages to more family style homes in Itasca. And now what we believe today, you can see there on your screen, is that we believe the most powerful way to help children today is by strengthening their own families. You know, the society is different than it was 100 years ago. There's no orphan trains. Thankfully, there's not as many true orphans whose parents have died. But nevertheless, children are still very much struggling and in need. And so we believe that the most powerful way to help those children is by strengthening the families that they are in. One of the things we found is that if a child is removed from their home, that's a difficult traumatic event to overcome, no matter what the reason was for the removal. Even if it was an awful situation that they needed protection and needed to be removed from that awful situation, the fact that they are now disconnected from their family creates even more trauma. And there's a lot of science that studied this now that shows that trauma has a long-term impact on a person's life, even as they move into adulthood. And so we believe today that the most powerful way to help children is to strengthen their families. And we have a lot of tools in our toolbox today to help families do that, to help them become stronger. And so that is our real goal today. You know, one of the stories that I've told to kind of illustrate that, and it's fairly apt in our time of COVID-19, is that I heard a story by Jerry Milner. Jerry Milner is the head of a federal agency regarding foster care, office in Washington, D.C., obviously. And I heard him tell this story that back in the 1950s, when we were responding to the polio epidemic, one of the things we could have done is we could have invested all of our resources into buying wheelchairs for people who were crippled by this dread disease of polio. You know, the analogy today might be that we're going to continue to purchase and make all the ventilators that we can today for people who are struck with COVID-19. But the reality is, what if we can develop a vaccine? What if we can develop a vaccine like we did in the 1950s to prevent polio, and like we're working to do today to prevent COVID-19, so that instead of waiting for a person to be struck by this disease, we can prevent them from having it to begin with, and prevent them from suffering through that disease. That is our goal, because historically with child welfare, we've waited until the abuse and neglect has already occurred, and then we've removed them from their home. And what if, instead of approaching it that way, we approach it from the perspective of what if we can help families become stronger and help prevent abuse and neglect from occurring? So that's our goal today, as we have evolved to help families become stronger and prevent abuse and neglect. And the way we do that is we strive to serve like Jesus. We for a long time have centered our philosophy of care around this phrase, serving like Jesus. And what that means for us is that when we approach our clients, we do that with respect. We don't treat them as outcasts, because that's the example that Jesus gave to us. When Jesus approached people, whether it was a person who was ill or a person who was outcast from society, Jesus always treated them with respect. And that's what we try to do, because the children and families we serve often feel like societal outcasts and often feel like they don't belong. And so we try real hard as we serve like Jesus to help them feel welcome and to treat them with respect. The second thing that means to us is that we focus on our client's strengths, on a child and family's strengths, rather than their problems. Our assumption is, just as we've learned from Jesus, is that people have within themselves a wealth of skill and capacity to live and to do well. And we want to help them tap into that and help them achieve their own goals, and to help them set goals for themselves, and to encourage and empower them in doing that as they draw on their own strengths to accomplish the goals that they set for themselves. The third thing that this means for us is that we encourage them to focus on their future rather than their past. There are many examples of Jesus doing this with those he encountered. Whether it was the woman at the well, that's a great example of a woman who had many problems in her life. And as Jesus was talking with her, she kept trying to draw the conversation back to all the problems that she had in her life. But Jesus refused to go there. He kept saying, no, you can be a witness for me. You can testify on my behalf to your community, even though you feel like an outcast now. He helped her focus on what she could become, the person she could become. So that's the third thing we do. And when we do those things well, we help children and families find hope and know the love of God, which is ultimately the outcome we're looking for. And so that's how we approach the children and families we serve today. So in order to measure how we're able to do that, we've set two overarching agency goals. We want to help kids have permanent homes, and we want to help their families become more self-sufficient. And really, those are just two ways that we're able to more concretely measure, are we helping families become stronger? And I want to emphasize one thing about permanent homes for children. You know, when we hear that phrase, permanent homes for children, sometimes our mind goes to adoption. for a child who for whatever reason had to be removed from their biological home, well, they are able to achieve a permanent home. They're able to find a permanent home through adoption, which is great. It's one of the things we do is adoption. But in our mind, the best permanent home for a child is the home they're already in. And so if we can help that family become stronger and help them be successful as a family and help the child remain there free from abuse and neglect, that's the idea. That's what we're really hoping to achieve. So those are our two core goals. As far as what we do, I just want to show you this visual. Claire mentioned that we're now in 3 states, thanks to the merger of those 3 Presbyterian agencies. We're in Texas, Missouri, and Louisiana. You see all those green dots there on the screen. Those represent the different programs we have in various communities around all 3 states. We actually have 28 cities. We have 14 different programs that we operate. In those 3 states, we serve about 4,500, 5,000 children and families each year in those different programs. But all of those programs, some of them are residential programs for kids, some of them are residential programs for families, many of them are community-based programs that help families in their own homes to become stronger. But in all of those, we're working to achieve those same 2 goals of permanent homes for kids and self-sufficiency for their families. So here in Texas, these are the programs that we have. We have 5 different programs in Texas, and we have 3 of these programs right here in Austin. Let me highlight the 2 that we don't have in Austin first. We unfortunately do not have a single-parent family program or a transitional living program. Those are residential programs for in the case of single-parent families, for single-parent families, so that a family can come into our program and stay together, both the mother or the father and their child, as they set goals and become stronger. We have those single-parent family programs in San Antonio. That's one of the programs that, through the capital campaign, Westlake Hills has contributed towards. We have a single-parent family program in Houston. We have one in Waxahachie, up south of Dallas, is where those single-parent family programs are located. And then in Waxahachie and in San Antonio, we also have a transitional living program for young adults who, most of them have aged out of the foster care system and are struggling with that transition to adulthood. It's a tough transition. As I said, there's a lot of trauma when you've been removed from your family and removed from any support system that you might have. And when you don't have that transition from childhood to adulthood is very challenging, and a lot of times doesn't yield very successful outcomes for those children and young adults. So we have these programs for young adults as they help to make that transition. And we're working with them in the same way that we do in all of our other programs, helping them set goals and focus on their strengths to help them become stronger. The last 3 programs are ones that we have right here in Austin. We do have foster care based out of our office here and off of William Cannon. And one of the requests I would have is that if any of you are interested in becoming foster parents or know someone who might be, please spread the word. We are always looking for wonderful and amazing families to take children who do need a home into their home and provide a loving home. And so we do have foster care here in Austin, and closely related to that, we do have an adoption program. So if any of you have been considering adoption or know someone who is, or perhaps know a young soon-to-be mom who is considering placing their child in adoption, we do have an adoption program here in Austin that we could help them and have a conversation with them about that program. And so we do have those 2 programs here in Austin. And then finally, our child and family program. And that's one of these programs I was describing earlier, a community-based program where we have a master's level social worker who works with struggling families. And by struggling families, it could be struggling with behavioral issues of their child, or struggling with economic issues and that's leading to struggles with their child or family and threatening the stability of the family. It could be any number of different kinds of issues that threaten stability. We have master's level social worker that can go into those homes and help those families set goals and then help them achieve those goals for themselves so that they can have a brighter future and find hope in that way. Just a couple of examples in that child and family program last year. I believe it was 79% of the families we worked with were able to achieve at least 2/3 of the goals that they set for themselves, which is one of our key measures of success. And when you extrapolate those numbers out across the state of Texas, more than 500 families became stronger as a result of participation in that program. So we're just really excited to be able to offer these 3 programs in Austin, but really programs all over the states of Texas, Missouri, and Louisiana. And so I want to just real quickly, I want to close with this. I want to tell a quick client story, and hopefully you all are seeing me again. Let me start my video. That might help. There we go.
There he is.
I want to close with just a client story. We had a woman who a number of years ago came into one of our programs in Texas, and she had a young boy when she was 16 years old. And it was a struggle, as you might imagine, particularly because her family basically didn't support her and kicked her out of the house. And so at 16 years old, not graduated yet from high school, young mom moved out on her own. And for a number of years, she basically couch surfed. Many of you may have heard that term. Basically what it means is finding a friend's house who you can stay with for a period of time. That's hard enough when you're by yourself. I can't imagine what that would be like when you have a young baby with you that you're couch surfing with. And so this young mom, as her child began to grow, she was actually able to finish high school. The high school that she was in had a daycare program. And so with the help of that daycare program, she was actually able to finish high school. She was motivated, and she was actually able to get kind of a series of part-time jobs. She was very motivated to try to do right by her young family. Unfortunately, none of those jobs, as you could imagine, really was stable enough, sufficient enough, paid enough, had benefits, whatever it might be, to really sustain her and her young child. And so she continued to struggle as her child became older. And she got connected with a local church in her community. And as it so happened, some of the members of that church had actually been volunteers at our program. So they were aware of our program. So they connected her with our program, and she quickly was admitted and came in and did amazing. She quickly set goals for herself to improve her education, to make her more employable. Her son was starting to exhibit some pretty rough behavioral issues, in part because really good parenting skills hadn't been taught to her, hadn't been modeled for her by her own parents. So we were able to help teach her what good parenting skills might look like. And I remember one of the things that she was so excited about was by this point, her son was in kindergarten and had been getting some not good reports from the teacher about his behaviors at school and some of the struggles that he was having. And she got so excited one grading period when he brought his report card home, and it had all smiley faces on his report card because he was doing better. And so she continued to do well. She was able to get a better job. She eventually got her own apartment for her and her young son. She was so excited because, as she said, this was the first time that she was able to give that to her young son, to have a home. And so she graduated from our program. We continued to stay connected with her, though, and some number of weeks, couple of months after she graduated, one of our workers went over and checked in on her, and she told me this story. I just love this story. She said that when she was talking with her, I said, "Well, how's it going?" She said, "Well, things are going well, and I just have to say that one of the things that I'm most excited about is every day now when my son gets home from school, he takes off his backpack and he says, 'Home, sweet home.'" And so that's just something that, we're just grateful to have been part of a family that may not have had a bright future because of the struggles that you could imagine. But because of this young woman's drive and energy and motivation, and with a little bit of support, she now has a bright future for her and her family. And that's what we are all about. So with that, I believe, Claire, are you going to be able to show our video? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this video it's a new client video that we put together for our lunches this year, which we're actually not able to have because of COVID-19. So we'll take the opportunity and show it to you all today. But as you see some of the children and families that we serve, I would encourage you to look for those examples of finding hope and finding Christ's love through this process. So thank you, Claire, for going in and showing that.
For sure.
I had an adopted family, and it was going a little They were pretty bad. It was, a lot of mental abuse and some physical. They actually decided to get partial custody with CPS, relinquishing their rights. And so I ended up aging out of CPS. So I had contacted my previous group home parents, and they told me about transitional living program with PCHAS. So I applied, and I was actually the first resident. All I knew was that it was going to be a place for me to live. I learned how to be independent and to get a job. I got my first car with the program. I was able to be stable and move out and have an apartment. I think that I would be another statistic, homeless, living on the streets, probably addicted to drugs. Just finding some way to not feel the pain that I was feeling. I don't think I could have done any of it without PCHAS. I owe them my life.
My life before coming to PCHAS was really different. Going home always felt like I was going back to war. I would just kind of hide, avoid my parents, or stay out of the house as much as I could. I came here at PCHAS through a friend. She referred me here, and I signed up, came for the interview, and got accepted. So I came as soon as I could. I moved within like 3 days. I had to get used to being able to sit at the table to eat dinner because I was not able to do that before. I also had to get used to being able to take a breath and relax, and I realized this was going to be a good place for me.
Back in 2016, we noticed that Maddie was kind of going downhill.
I started becoming more and more depressed. It was pretty gradual. I stopped eating eventually. I stopped taking care of myself.
Things had gotten really out of control in our house. Things had actually gotten physical between Maddie and myself and Maddie and her father. She was really angry in addition to being depressed. Maddie would not even talk to us without screaming. Our house was full of yelling, and we had even talked about institutionalizing Maddie because we just didn't even know what to do.
I've been to the behavioral health unit 3 times at the hospital. The first time I went into my mom's room and I said that I didn't want to be here anymore and that I had a plan of how to kill myself and that I was wanting to do it. So I was sent there. I got into a really big fight with my mom and I tried to pull her down a flight of stairs and the cops were called and they sent me to the behavioral unit again.
And we went through that cycle of getting her into the hospital and getting medicine for a year before we found PCHAS. They were flexible in their scheduling. They came to our house. We couldn't have done this if they did not come out to our house. We would not have made the time. We were so broken at that point that to try to get us all on the same schedule to go to another location to do intense therapy work just honestly would not have happened.
Instead of just wanting to help me and fix me, it was we needed to all be fixed together. So it made me find value in myself to see that my family cared about me and that they loved me and that they wanted me to be okay and they wanted me to be there.
The change from before we started the counseling with PCHAS and now is dramatic. There are almost no words to describe it. We were a broken family and we were all kind of individually broken people. And now we're truly a happy family.
I feel great about myself now. I feel like I deserve to be alive. I feel like I deserve to be loved.
Our family was saved by this program. Absolutely, honest to God, saved.
My daughter's name is Azariva. She is 2.5. Her nickname is Azzy. I had a hard life. I had some struggles that I went through. I had an abusive husband, and I had to find my way out of that situation, and I did. I went to the shelter, and they recommended PCHAS. I heard that PCHAS can provide us a home to stay and that they would help us get on our feet so that I can have a better life for my daughter. My first reaction was, wow, it's beautiful. I hope I can get in. Go! Being a single parent, it has its challenges, like financially. When I first got here, they paid for the daycare for 6 weeks, and that really helped me get on my feet.
Our yes to foster care was not necessarily for the purpose of growing our family. If we foster children to love them for a period of time and that they would all go back to their families, we were great with that.
We just had a heart for helping others. I mean, there's just a need there. in which we felt like we had more room in our family to give and to open up. And so we decided, there's a way for us to do it. We had filled out those other applications and weren't getting calls back. And when we did PCHAS and they called back immediately, like, this is what we thought we were going to get, that friendly feel, that family feel right away.
SK came at 4 months. He had been removed at birth from his mom, but had been with family friend for the first 4 months. She called CPS one day and said it was more than she could handle. It's the most incredible thing that they can hand you a baby. And there's a part of you that forgets that they don't belong to you, which is what makes the giving them back extra hard. Foster care isn't just about our side of foster care. There are two families intertwined in this one story. And as we start feeling more like he's our own, this remembrance that but he's not our own. We've just been asked to be a good steward of him for the time that he's with us. PCHAS has been really supportive of us from the beginning. They really take the time to invest in us and to know us. They have made this journey so much easier to walk. I think there's a need across the board for families to step in and say yes to fostering. There are a lot of kids that need someone committed to loving them well for a season.
It really doesn't matter where you grew up or what you've been through. It's what you make of what you've been through. I was able to grow in a safe environment and to realize that I will be okay as long as I put to use what I learned.
PCHAS will give you a great opportunity to be able to find a safe place, to be able to grow and develop yourself better.
I'm here with Maddie today because of this program. PCHAS came into our house on our schedule and met with us as a family, met with Rob and I as parents, helped us get on the same page, and just helped us reconnect and heal.
The PCHAS staff has been really helpful. They're really amazing people, easy to talk to. They're loving, they're caring. They're just here for us all the way, and I'm just so thankful for them.
All right. That was a great video. Thank you for sharing that with us, David.
Oh, thank you, Claire.
So friends, in the time that we now have...
Where are you experiencing pain right
now?
now?
Sorry.
Your knees hurt really badly.
Sorry,
And
friends. 1 second.
Level?
Thank you all for your patience. Something happening in my YouTube. In the time that we still have, what we would love to do is to have some Q&A. If there are things that you all would like to ask David, you can drop them into the chat or wave a hand at me and I'll bring you off mute. I kind of wanted to maybe kick us off and give people a chance to enter their questions, but feels like the question of the moment, just how what's going on with COVID-19, whether it's the illness itself or social distancing, how is that impacting PCHAS from where you sit, David?
Well, thank you, Claire. It obviously is impacting all of us, and certainly PCHAS is no exception. I'm happy to say that our focus remains the same. Our focus is that we're continuing to try to help strengthen families by helping to have children to have permanent homes and to help their families become self-sufficient. The reality is that because of the impact of COVID-19, whether it's the health issue or the economic issue, sometimes families becoming stronger feels even further away than it was before. And so the need is greater than it's ever been to help families become stronger, even in the midst of this pandemic. And so that continues to be our goal, and we're continuing to be able to do that in new and different ways. For PCHAS itself, what that means is that we've had to completely pivot for now into doing what we're doing together today, which is virtual meetings and virtual client contacts, using video chats and things like that, which brings its own set of challenges, but yet nevertheless still does allow us to connect with families and to help them to set goals and to become stronger. One example of that, I love it when our staff gets creative. I heard one of them tell a story, I guess it was on this Friday, that earlier in this pandemic, she was trying to connect. She was one of our child and family workers, just like the child and family program we have here in Austin. And she was struggling to connect with, she was working with a family for a while, and she was struggling to connect with this, I think it was an elementary age boy, over video chat. He just wasn't really interested in connecting with her by video, and the mom was struggling, and our worker her name's Sheila. She was trying to connect with this young boy. So she had the idea that she knew that he loved McDonald's shakes, chocolate McDonald's shakes specifically. And so she went to McDonald's and bought 2 chocolate shakes and went to their house and left a chocolate shake on their porch and went and sat back in her car. And from a distance, they enjoyed chocolate shakes together from his front porch. And you know, the magic of that is that all of a sudden, by demonstrating that she cared and demonstrating that she was willing to do that and bring him a chocolate shake in the midst of all this, now he's more willing to connect with her by video chat. And they're engaged now in that process. So that's just an example of how we're trying to keep doing the same things we've always done, even in the midst of this pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how much communication right now feels like it has to do with these touches through technology, right? Like whether it's a phone call or Zoom. But then I see a lot of people in our church community, especially, reaching out through little gifts and acts of service and leaving things on each other's porches and that kind of thing. And just thinking about how that could, you know, impact a child where connections haven't been so strong in his or her life. I hadn't thought about, because it's just all of these ways that many of us might like to connect or foreclose to us. And so we're connecting more in these other ways. I guess that's affecting everybody.
Yes, absolutely. I saw one question I was just looking about Jim Strickland's father being raised in Itasca, and that's true. Art Strickland grew up as a great friend of ours, did grow up in Itasca, and has been a great longtime friend of Peachaz. And so, yes, that is correct that he was raised in Itasca, grew up in Itasca.
I really loved seeing, in addition to that comment, some of the other comments with these really, like, basically personal connections, family connections and family histories that have a little bit of Peachaz in them. I hadn't realized that about you guys.
Yeah, and I saw the mention of George Knapp. I recognize that name. I'm sure I've seen that name on documents that I found, but that's interesting that there's a connection even then going back to the Itasca board. So I do recognize that name, probably just from historic documents that I've seen.
So one thing, David, and again, y'all feel free to drop questions into the chat, but one thing I'm curious about is just what you all at Peachaz are most excited about for, you know, the next, I know it feels hard to forecast the future right now, but what you're excited about for the near future and the long term?
Well, you probably could tell by my remarks. The thing that when I came to Peachaz over 20 years ago, most of our programs were residential programs for kids. We had a foster care program and we had our group homes. And they're wonderful programs. We still have those programs today, and maybe not as many, but we still do have them today. But as we've continued to evolve, I've gotten really excited about that idea of being able to strengthen families and therefore prevent abuse and neglect and help children avoid the trauma of having to be removed from their home. I've gotten excited about that is because I've seen with our own work and with the work of others, I've seen that it's possible to do that can happen. Maybe not in every case, but it can happen. And so that's where I see us moving, even in the midst of this pandemic. We're continuing to look for opportunities, particularly for those kinds of programs where we can expand and grow even in other areas. And I really appreciate you all's help to help spread the word on that, because I realize that Peachaz is most known as the group homes, as the orphanage. And that's really, as we've evolved, that's not really the need today. children and families have different needs but still struggle. And so I really appreciate you all helping to spread the word on that. And I hope you get as excited as I do about the possibility of strengthening families in that way.
So David, Bill Galloway has asked this question. Do PTAS programs qualify as essential services under current state and local protocols?
Actually, we do. Social services is considered one of the essential services under the state and local protocols. Nevertheless, we've still tried to look for opportunities to accomplish what we need to accomplish while keeping our clients and one another safe. And so we are not out in the field, you might say, as we once were. We will be soon, particularly like in our foster care programs and some of those other programs. I expect fairly soon we will be coming back into the field in those programs and in other programs as soon as we're able, as soon as it's safe.
Yeah, I feel like that's very similar to the kind of church response, and what lots of nonprofits are doing is erring on the side of compassion and caution with those who are vulnerable, for sure. So Paul Gamble has asked how interested people can best participate in PCHAS.
It's a great question. You know, honestly, in the midst of COVID-19, the thing we need most is financial support. I mean, that's just the reality of it. We are not able to offer a lot of volunteer opportunities in the midst of this because of the protections that we need. The day will come again when we will have volunteer needs and opportunities that we would love to promote and have you all at Westlake Hill strongly participate in. There's been many who have, and that day will come again. But honestly, for now, what we most need is continued financial support.
Thanks, David. So Don Scott, one of our church members, is asking about the faith of foster parents. Are foster parents required to be Christians?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we are clear about when we meet with a family or when a family inquires with us is one of the first things we talk about is we tell them the story that I just told you all about our philosophy of care. That our philosophy of care is to strive to serve like Jesus, and this is what it means for us. And we let them know that we often pray before our meetings or at our meetings. I mean, this is a faith-based organization that is Presbyterian and is Christian. Beyond that, we don't have a rule that says you have to be Christian. We really just let folks know who we are, and if they want to come be part of that, and can be supportive of that and can be a part of that ministry with us, that's okay. The reality is the huge majority of our foster parents are because of that, huge majority. But that's really how we talk about that with them, is not so much a negative rule that excludes someone, but more a positive statement that says this is who we are. And if you want to come be part of that, this is who we are.
Great. Maybe this will be the last one, David. I'm kind of thinking this question from Charles might be around some of what we've heard in the news, you know, as families are having to quarantine together. Are you and your staff encountering more issues maybe of family violence or abuse, or getting more referrals based on that?
Am I muted now, Claire? It all of a sudden pointed up muted.
I turned you off for a minute because I think my voice was echoing in your mic.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm good now. No, we're seeing that same thing reflected. At the moment, we are actually getting a little bit fewer referrals. We're still getting referrals, but a little bit fewer referrals. I suspect that as children are seen more in the community, whether it's in schools or churches or wherever it might be, those abuse referrals will pick up. But we are seeing that in terms of referrals for placement as well. They're down a little, not a lot, but a little.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, any final questions?
Claire, before we wrap up, could I show one picture? I just want to share one other thing that I'm excited about related to COVID-19. I'll be real quick. This just goes to show what the kind of thing I get excited about. We had a young mom come into one of our single parent family programs a number of years ago. And she's not given us permission to share the full story of why she came into our care. So I'm going to respect that and not share that. But just know she had some real challenges as she was coming into care. She had a young daughter, and she was pregnant with a daughter on the way. And she came into our single parent family program, and it was up and down. She struggled some, and she had some successes, but eventually was able to successfully complete that program. And at the time she completed the program, she was in nursing school. And she left the program. She met a gentleman and got married. And after she completed our program, she completed nursing school and became a nurse. And I want to show you a picture of her real quick. Let me see if I can find it here. There we go. Can you all see the picture of the nurse there? Our former client is the one on the right, to our right. They're looking straight at the camera. But she became a nurse up in the Dallas area, actually. She became a nurse, has been working. And it's been a few years that have passed. And she felt the call about 2 months ago to volunteer and go to New York City and serve in our hotspot COVID-19 patients. And this picture is of her in a New York hospital on a COVID-19 ward serving those in need. And it just amazes me that this is a woman who not that many years ago needed help and needed support to sort of set her own goals and to achieve the things that she was hoping to achieve. But now here she is just a few years later with a family. So she left her young daughters now with her now husband to care for her family back in Dallas while she felt the call to be a hero, basically, and live in New York. She's still there now. She's in New York now serving COVID-19 patients. She's been there for about 2 months. And so I just love to share that story because this is the outcome we're hoping for, that a family can become stronger and literally move from a situation where they need help and support to, in this case, the ability to give help and support to others. And so that's the outcome that we are always hoping for. And I just want to share that with you all. So thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much, David. That's a great way for us to close today. And I just appreciate all of you all for coming to hear David speak. And I encourage you, if you want to stick around for a little while. I know that some of you in the Third Well class have been doing some visiting after our guest speakers have come. Feel free to stay on the call, but David will bid you farewell at this point with all of our thanks. Thank you so much for being here, and we hope to hear from you as things continue to evolve. And we just appreciate you and stand in support of you all, and appreciate all you all have done and are continuing to do for families and kids.
Thank you, Claire. So appreciate it. Thank you all.